Hello and welcome to the fourth in our View to a Border webinar series in cooperation with the United Nations Office of Counter-Terror. Today we will discuss the use of new technologies and challenges on data protection. I'm your host, Tony Kingham. I'm editor of Border Security Report magazine and a director of the World Border Security Congress and Border Security Network. Before we go on, some housekeeping. I'd like to point out the Q&A tab at the top right-hand side of your screen. You can ask questions there at any time during the webinar, and we will answer as many as possible during the Q&A at the end. If your screen freezes at any time, please press refresh, and you should rejoin us automatically. So, Rocco Messina, who is head of the Border Security and Management Unit at the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Center, will start us with some opening remarks. Rocco, the screen's yours.
Thank you, Tony. Good day from New York, and welcome to our virtual dialogue. As head of the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Center Border Security Management Unit within the Office of Counterterrorism, I'm delighted to open the fourth webinar of A View to a Border Season 2. This is a series of technical interactive dialogues devoted to cross-border cooperation and information sharing in the context of counterterrorism and related transnational organized crime. This UNCCT, in partnership with World Border Security Congress, has been conducting over the course of the first half of 2021. These webinars are being delivered under the framework of UNCCT Global Border Security and Management Program, designed as a key component of the UNCCT strategy with the aim to strengthen member states' capacities to prevent the cross-border movement of terrorists and stem the flow of foreign terrorist fighters in line with the rule of law, international human rights law, humanitarian law, and refugee law. The ability of violent extremist groups to expand and project themselves beyond their national points of origin has grown exponentially over the last decade, with increased movement of people, goods, and ideas across borders. The globalization of violent extremism and terrorism and the cross-border nature of terrorist and criminal networks' reach, including their span of recruitment and operation, highlight the urgency to intensify national effort and regional activities. It is essential to set up further strategic and cooperation on migration and border management. This includes ensuring access to international protection, sharing of relevant information such as risk analysis, enhancing border control, ensuring the effective implementation of readmission and return policies, and the fight against irregular migration and migrant smuggling. Strengthening international and regional cooperation and further consolidating border and migration capacities is, of course, necessary. The current centralized and decentralized information system vary in their regional coverage. We have different data storage criteria, different responsible authorities designated for processing or transmitting the information. The 2015 Paris attack are a clear example of the need to enhance cooperation between law enforcement authorities. The suspected planner, carrying a Belgian passport, traveled between Europe and Syria several times prior to the attack, despite being subject of a European arrest warrant. This case illustrates the severe consequence of the lack of detection and follow-up based on information that was supposed to be stored in the Eurodac system. The sharing of relevant information between law enforcement authorities in member states is really key to ensuring appropriate detection and follow-up when a particular individual is considered a security risk. Currently, national authorities face a complex and fragmented landscape regarding governance, geographical coverage, and data storage management of this information system. This really hampers the exchange of information between national authorities, leading to blind spots where information of person perceived as a security risk, including those suspected of involvement in terrorist activities, might be overlooked. Only through the interoperability of border management system would it be possible to address the existing gaps in the information exchange between law enforcement authorities and overcome difficulties with detecting identity fraud, failure in registration system, and challenges related to return procedures of rejected asylum seekers. Frontline officers and law enforcement officials need information, tool, and expertise, including biometric data, to effectively identify persons who pose a security-related risk, including criminal actors, known or suspected terrorists, and foreign terrorist fighters. And of course, they need to prevent their travel. Those on the front line also need advanced training to gain the knowledge and skill needed to understand and use such data. Effectively managing and utilizing data relating to the movement of people, goods, conveyances, and migratory flow requires innovative technology, tool, and concept, interoperable information architecture, and the use of new and emerging technologies, such as biometric data system, provide a means for border authority to effectively and efficiently balance their security and facilitation mandates. On the security side, this includes detecting and preventing the cross-border travel of those who pose a security-related threat, balanced against facilitating legitimate trade and travel. Operational data exchange and information sharing within and between member states and international organizations, of course, including Interpol, is also vital while preserving the fundamental principle of proportionality and necessity. However, there is always a risk that neither policies nor legislation can keep up with innovation and technical development, leaving a governance deficit. Strong legal, administrative, and policy framework need to be in place in order to prevent misuse of data and incur in human rights violation. Respect for human rights and the rule of law must be the guiding principles and must also be reflected in practice when existing information sharing systems are updated and or new architectures implemented. Indeed, the General Assembly and the Security Council has understood the respect for human rights, fundamental freedom, and the rule of law are really complementary and mutually reinforcing with effective counterterrorism measures and are essential part of successful law enforcement efforts. We must acknowledge and address through adequate safeguard the risk that some of these measures could potentially have on the enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms, including the rights of privacy, the right to due process, and the freedom of movement, as well as the right of asylum seekers and refugees under international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and refugee law. Additionally, technology does have vulnerabilities. I'm sure we all experienced this in the past month with the use of this Zoom, WebEx, Teams call, and also difficulties to switch from one platform to another. It's really crucial that system vulnerabilities are recognized and minimized. Appropriate risk management through careful contextual design, risk mitigation strategies, accurate enrollment of information and data are necessary considerations. Promoting transparency and effective and responsible oversight and redress mechanisms is essential to ensure that information sharing, watch listing, and the use of database do not impede legitimate and lawful travel. To sum up, my message would be that in the myriad of threats and challenges being faced at border, really we need to find innovative approaches which are interoperable, yet also but balanced and fully aligned with the respect of human rights, fundamental freedom, and the rule of law as top priority. And of course, allow the legitimate passage of people and goods. Today, you will hear from our expert speaker how timely access to critical information about identified or suspected terrorist activity is central to counterterrorism effort. You will learn how to exchange of information and cross-border cooperation, the use of biometric data are crucial tools for the investigation and prosecution of terrorist acts and the identification of terrorists and foreign terrorist fighters, including the returnees and relocators, as well as the organized crime network that facilitate the travel of the terrorists. On behalf of the United Nations Counterterrorism Center, thank you all for joining us today. And I want to extend my sincere appreciation to our keynote speaker and friend and Interpol expert, Karel. This webinar would not have been possible without, of course, the contribution of the friends and colleagues from Interpol and invaluable insight and perspective. I sincerely hope you find the interactive dialogue interesting and encourage you to actively participate in the question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I now give the floor to my colleague, a good friend, Ms. Esther Zubiri, that our senior expert. And she will be the moderator of our webinar. Esther, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Rocco. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today to moderate our interactive dialogue. We have a most interesting program for our virtual discussions today. However, before we start, it is important to mention that the opinions expressed by our experts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Secretariat of the United Nations or the governments of its member states. Today's webinars, as Rocco pointed out, aims to address the use of new technologies and challenges on data protection, with a special focus on Interpol Project Hotspot and the outcomes of the data collection and screening trial conducted in a pilot operation in the Western Balkans during September and October 2019. And now, to get us started, let me waste no more time and proceed with introducing our keynote speaker. I am most pleased and honored to introduce Mr. Karel Pelan, who holds the post of the Assistant Director in Interpol's Counter-Terrorist Directorate and leads the Terrorist Network Subdirectorate. We are truly delighted to have you here today. Karel, the floor is all yours.
Thanks a lot, Esther. Can you hear me well?
We hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for giving me the floor. And also thank you, Rocco, for such a nice introduction and a warm welcome. It's a really pleasure for myself and also for my team to be here today with you. And I'll be looking forward also to a practical cooperation in the future beyond this webinar.